Previous presentation titled Defining Blended Learning, which is also found on this site, it was shown that the contemporary definition of blended learning is related primarily to the relationship between face-to-face learning and e-learning and the convergence of both. It was also suggested that blended learning could be seen at two levels. At a superficial level, blended learning represented a different delivery strategy whilst maintaining the same power and control relationships that are present in existing models of education. It was also suggested that blended learning could be interpreted as having a transformational capacity, that is, the ability to change the power and control relationships in educational systems through a critical analysis of the pedagogic assumptions that underpin the delivery approach. The current presentation looks at models of blended learning and in doing so extends the discussion. In 2006, Graham produced a model that defined blended learning in relation to space, time, fidelity and humanness. Space is defined along a continuum from live to distributed learning. Time is described along a continuum from synchronous to asynchronous or delayed communication. Fidelity is along a continuum from high fidelity, which appeals to a range of senses with a richness of communication, to low fidelity, which appeals to a single sense and lacks richness. Humanness is characterised by a continuum from a high level of humanness with human interaction to a low level of humanness through interaction with machines. Here, at a superficial level, I offer an alternative model which is based on the variables of location, media, degree of separation and degree of synchronicity. With respect to the variable of location, as it reflects the idea of blended learning, location may relate to any combination of places where people choose to learn, and there are a number of terms that relate to this idea of location. These include campus-based, off-campus, workplace-based, home-based, and more recently, the virtual place. I propose that in respect to blended learning, it is the combination and proportions of the importance of these places in learning that becomes important in the educational design. In terms of the degree of separation, we need to consider the degree of separation between the teacher and learners, and between the learners themselves. This has been a source of much discussion in the distance education literature. It seems to me that face-to-face learning represents learning where the teacher, the learners are in one space at one time. That is, the degree of geographic separation between the two is small, whereas distance education represents a delivery approach where there is geographic separation between teachers and learners. When we introduce the idea of virtual space, we introduce a complicating factor, as students and teachers may be geographically dislocated, yet in the same virtual space at the same time. It is my proposition here that it is the combination of the degrees of face-to-face and distant education and the way in which virtual space is used to increase or decrease space between teachers, learners and learners that is important. In blended learning, in respect to the media used, the variety of media includes print-based, audio, visual, audio-visual. These may be in digital or analogue format. They may be distributed in either physical or virtual formats. This category includes the traditional media, such as telephone, and more modern media, like online high-level simulations. The category of synchronicity relates mainly to the idea of communication. In a synchronous environment, there is minimal delay between the communications of one person with others. In an asynchronous environment, there is a period of time between those interactions. So, most verbal interactions, whether they're face-to-face or over a telephone or over Skype, are synchronous in nature. There's a direct interaction in the communications between the individuals or groups without significant delay. In the case of blogs, wikis and emails, for example, these environments are asynchronous. There is a significant gap between one communication and the return communication. It should be noted here that some environments, like the face-to-face or campus-based environment, allow for both synchronous and asynchronous communication depending on the teaching and learning strategy that is adopted. To conclude this section of the presentation, at a superficial level, blended learning can be categorised according to the variables of location, media, separation and synchronicity. It is the combination and convergences of these variables that is inherent in blended learning and is important in the educational design of a blended learning environment. These categories provide a way to describe the way in which blended learning is manifest. It is superficial in the sense that it does not engage in any critical examination of the power and control relationships which are manifest in the delivery approach. That is, the locus of those responsible for decision making remains unchanged and unchallenged. In conventional models, this means that governments are responsible for establishing curriculum and teachers are responsible for establishing the pedagogic approach that is adopted. It is these groups who decide whether the relationships between teachers and learners are of a horizontal or vertical nature. They also decide whether the curriculum is of a horizontal and holistic nature or a vertical and atomistic nature. Therefore, official influencers are in control of who gets distributed what sorts of education and who is likely to benefit from those educations. Conventionally, these pedagogic approaches have been described as behaviourist, cognitivist, constructivist, either individual or social, and critical reflective pedagogies. More simply put, these either reflect a transmission or transformational style of education. They provide the principles upon which the educational model is premised. What I am proposing here is it is through meaningful discussion of these pedagogic principles that teachers can fully engage with the idea of blended learning and have their most important influence on educational systems. These power relations are manifest in the locus of control over where learning occurs, the pace at which it occurs, the sequence in which it occurs, the content that is available, and the communication strategies that are used. This returns us to the four variables of location, media, separation, and synchronicity that were discussed earlier in this presentation. These manifest in the sorts of resources that are available, the means of communication, the sorts of activities that are conducted, the level of interactivity between different players, and the relationships between teaching, learning, and assessment. In conclusion, the model of blended learning that is adopted is a reflection of the power and control relations that are inherent in the educational system. These can be categorised according to the variables of location, media, separation, and synchronicity, which are represented in the particular educational approach that is adopted in a specific location. Therefore, blended learning at a superficial level offers an opportunity to restructure educational systems for efficiency and effectiveness without challenging or critiquing the power bases that underpin it. At a more fundamental level, blended learning offers an opportunity for transformation of educational systems such that they become more equitable.